Now today we have with us Amelia Frahm, and Amelia, I must say, was very generous. I had screwed up my schedule. She was scheduled to speak next week, but she agreed to come this week. She did get her taxes done in time, so she could do that, and I appreciate her flexibility on that. Amelia is an award-winning author known for taking contentious, difficult topics and putting them in a format children of all ages understand and find interesting. A public relations graduate from the University of Florida, Frahm began her professional career in 1982 when she was hired to convince South Texans that the nuclear power plant being constructed in their backyard was indeed a safe thing to have happen. One of her first assignments was to implement a school program, and that is why we have Amelia here today to talk about this particular experience and what she's done with that. That experience, she said, was a life lesson and taught her that, quote, fear, whether it's of cancer, nuclear power, or anything else, is fueled by a lack of knowledge and misinformation. Now, in 1994, at the age of 34, Amelia was diagnosed with breast cancer, perturbed by the lack of information available for young children, and unable to persuade the mainstream publishers to take on what was considered a controversial children's book about cancer. She established the Nutcracker Publishing Company. She helped pioneer resources for families coping with cancer when in 2001 her company released the award-winning book, which is out front. I may have, well, I thought I had it. Yes, I do have it here. Tickles Tabitha Cancer Tankerous Mommy, which is this book, which won the Benjamin Franklin Award. It's a cancer awareness curriculum for elementary students. So that's out front and is for sale. And then in 2011, she forged another genre with the release of the controversial award-winning children's book, Nuclear Power, How Nuclear Power Plant Really Works, which is here, and that's available for sale as well. Amelia can talk about that, or I'm sure she will talk about that in a presentation. She's a member of the Board of Advisors for the Global Go Nuclear Foundation and actively promotes both cancer awareness and nuclear advocacy. Amelia resides in Apex. Her daughter Tabitha is a graduate of North Carolina State, and her son Jordan attends Western Carolina University. And I'm just really pleased to have her here with us today. This weekend I gave a talk over in Chapel Hill on energy policy. Not surprisingly, nuclear power was no good over in Chapel Hill. That was not a good source of power. And what our kids are being taught in school is even more amazing. And so I'm very glad to have Amelia here. And Amelia.
Put that on.
Sure.
Just like it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Am I loud enough? Thank you. Well, bear with me. I will try to not to bore you. I know the lunchtime crowds can be a tough crowd sometimes, but I'm glad you've ate already. My title today is Lighting Up Minds and Radiating Brilliance, Nuclear Literacy for Elementary Children. Does that provocative title, when you hear that, did it conjure up images of young elementary kids at the local Sharon Harris nuclear plant visiting the Energy and Environmental Center? Or when you heard that topic with the word nuclear in it, did you kind of get the visual of the mushroom cloud, let's be honest, and some reporter standing in front of a mammoth-sized cooling tower interviewing an expert who equates nuclear power with weapons of mass destruction? You all look like a very intelligent audience to me, but do you know what makes a nuclear power plant nuclear? So much of what we understand today as adults has everything to do with what we learn in elementary school. During this process of writing my children's book about nuclear power, what I learned is this. The only nuclear literacy programs that children here in North Carolina and throughout the states are watching are the ones featuring Homer Simpson when he goes to work at the nuclear plant. Now, I have something here, and I bet if I ask my elementary students what this is, anybody here know what this is, by the way? It's a fuel pellet from that goes in the nuclear reactor. Anybody might know what this represents. Homer has this all the time on his show. I guarantee you if I went to an elementary school, they could tell me what this represents. But they wouldn't know what the fuel pellet was for. My first job was at the South Texas Project nuclear power plant. And I was hired right out of college by a power company to represent them and 3 other companies. And they were building the power plant. It was under construction. It was right after 3 Mile Island, and it was during the Chernobyl nuclear accident. So needless to say, it wasn't a very popular idea. And one of my assignments was to create a school program for elementary children. Well, before I could educate those elementary children, I had to educate myself. I knew absolutely nothing about nuclear power, and I'll be completely honest, the topic was not at all interesting to me. We did not have Homer back in my day. If we'd had him, I might have paid more attention, because if I had ever learned anything about nuclear literacy in elementary school, I must have slept through it. That experience at the nuclear plant and doing that school program is one of the things that inspired me to go on and write a children's picture book about it. I had always wished that there was something I could give to my students besides this how does it work display that we, or brochure that we would hand out to the students there. Well, it took me about 2 decades, but eventually I came up with it, and it's this book right here, Nuclear Power, How a Nuclear Power Plant Really Works. One reason it was took so long, well, first of all, I started researching when I moved to North Carolina. I had gotten out of the nuclear industry. I was doing something else entirely. But when I came to North Carolina, I lived down the road from a nuclear power plant. And I was amazed to discover there was still no children's book about nuclear power. So I started researching and I started writing. Well, I started writing when my son was this high. Now he's probably almost 6'2". This book, a lot of children's books, they're easy to read, but sometimes they're hard to write. And this book in particular, I wanted a creative book that would get the attention of children. However, I knew that to get the attention of the nuclear industry, it had to be factually correct in the science and technology category. So it took a while to write. I was actually putting the finishing touches on the book when the accident in Fukushima occurred. And I have to say, prior to that accident, I didn't get a whole lot of enthusiasm about a book about nuclear power. Most of my neighbors, they looked at me with like bored expressions and yawns. Even the nuclear industry was lukewarm about it. But that changed things. And it also changed my mind about the book I was working on. So I tried to push it forward. And several months later, I had the book published. And it wasn't long after its release that my Facebook page was simply bombarded with comments calling me everything from an unfit mother to a nuclear pedophile. Now, social bullying is one of the reasons I'm standing before you here today advocating for nuclear literacy. None of the experts who commented on my Facebook page had read the book. And it was obvious to me, not only because of the comments they made, because at that particular time, the only way you could purchase the book was through my company, Nutcracker Publishing Company. And my PayPal account was completely empty. So, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree, but Facebook is an excellent example of why education is so important. My Facebook page was filled with hysterical comments by uninformed, faked experts, provoking the fears of susceptible adults regarding reading my book to their children. It has been my experience that fear is fueled by a lack of knowledge and misinformation. And it's that belief that led me to my publishing career. I was diagnosed in 1994 at the age of 34 with breast cancer, and I had 2 small children. And some of you remember back in that day, that was an era when you did not talk about cancer. Even adults whispered about it. Not talking about my diagnosis and my cancer was literally making my daughter sick. And that was the motivation for me to write Tickles Tabitha's Cancer-Tankerous Mommy. It took 7 years later before I finally published the book, because what I had to do is I had to establish my own company to do it. Back in the day, I didn't get a lot of enthusiasm over that book either. It's hard for people to understand this today. We talk about cancer, children talk about cancer, but back then, the idea of me going to a school or talking about about my own child, much less a stranger's child, that just didn't happen. So it took a while, 7 years, before I finally published the book, and I established a company to do it. But 7 years later, Tickles Tabitha's Cancertankerous Mommy made its debut on the Rosie O'Donnell talk show. And that book went on to help pioneer cancer resources for families coping with cancer. Now, I have made a career advocating for cancer awareness. So you can kind of imagine the expressions on some of my colleagues' faces that didn't know about that other career I had way back when I told them that I was going to be writing a children's book about nuclear power plants. Yeah. I can still remember one colleague, he looked at me and said, "What on earth would you want to write about that for?" Well, I do not stand up here and profess to be an expert on nuclear power, even though I worked in the nuclear industry. I am not an expert on cancer, even though I am a cancer survivor. But as an author and a writer, I do advocate for both nuclear literacy and cancer awareness. So, the one thing my diverse topics have in common is that they seek to dispel fear by providing information. And I hope they do it in a format that even adults find entertaining. But I have to tell you that nothing I have written in my children's books is near as entertaining as real life has been. One day while I was working at the South Texas Project nuclear plant, my office was in the visitor center. And this van load of women, church women, they were elderly ladies, they came in and parked in the parking lot, and one of them got out and came inside, and she invited me to join them outside. And she told me they were waiting for the spaceship to refuel. Now, she was serious. I would have loved to put that in my children's book about nuclear power, but I knew there was no way the nuclear engineers would ever allow that, the ones that critiqued my book. Some of them are still upset today because when I wrote the book, I used a rat and a cat and a bird to tell the story instead of using real live people. So, anyway, it was my privilege to return to that very same town where I was inspired to write it when my book was released. And I did a book signing there. And the whole town in Bay City, it really revolves around the local nuclear power plant. And just about everybody turned out for the event, and a lot of them bought my book for their children. And I was invited back by just about every school in the community to come back several months later and present my school program. And I did. And after one of those programs, one of the parents came up to talk to me. She worked at the nuclear plant, and she thanked me. And she told me that she had always assumed her little boy knew where she worked and what she did, up until she read him my book. Now her son, she would kiss him goodbye every day, and she'd say, "Mommy's going to work at the plant." Well, he was not an unintelligent little boy. He was very smart. And he had studied all about plants at school. However, he had not studied about power plants. And all that time, he thought his mommy worked as a florist. Yep. I was told by his teacher, and I have been told by teachers across the country, including North Carolina, that they have limited time, money, and resources to focus on subjects that are not on the integrate or EOG test. And nuclear literacy, unfortunately, is just not covered. So today, what I thought I would do, I know I'm standing before a lot of movers and shakers here, and I'm going to present you some of the presentation that I take to schools today. I hope you'll like it enough that you'll go out and you'll advocate for it and tell whoever you know to, sign that lady up to come to your school. And without further ado, I hope I can make my technology work. I'm going to give you a reading from my book and talk a little bit about how nuclear power plants really work. But in case you do not remember the nuclear literacy from your own days, I'm going to go over, this is the brochure. Let me talk about this real quick. This is the type of brochure that the power company I used to work for and the nuclear energy professionals that critique my book insisted that I put in the back of it. This is how a power plant works, in case you don't know. Here's the reactor vessel. These are steam generators. This reactor kind of works like stove top, and that it's heating water, and here's your nuclear fuel, and it's heating this water in the steam generators, kind of like a pot. They're being heated to steam. That steam's driving our turbines. Here's my turbine. It's spinning around. It's a big fan, and it's operating the electric generator. This generator is what produces electricity. Here's our power lines, taking the electricity to our homes. And then we have a cooling tower here that's helping cool and condense that hot steam back into water. This is the basic of what I used to do at my school program, the brochure that we used to pass out. But today, I want to talk about how a nuclear power plant really works. So let me go back. Let's see. Let me see if I can make this work. You'll notice in this book, and I wrote it before anything happened in Fukushima, but you'll kind of notice how people, when they don't understand something, they always want to blame it on something or someone. That happens in my children's book. The rat and the bird, they blame everything they don't understand on a cat named Penelope. Let's see. At the nuclear power plant, inside the nuclear reactor that sat beneath the big dome, a whole lot of fissioning was going on. Where did it come from? Where did it go? Everyone who lived nearby was curious to know. High atop the turbine building beside the dome, a chubby rat bragged to a pretty bluebird. "I know where fissioning comes from." "Well," called the bird who had flown in from nearby, "I know where electricity goes." And they began to boast about who knew the most about nuclear power plant. It took them a while to figure out they were being disagreeable over something they agreed about. That never happens, does it? No. The purpose of any power plant is to make electricity, chirped the bird from the transmission line where she was perched. "I know that," declared the rat, "but a nuclear power plant makes electricity using fissioning. Who do you think causes it?" And he gave his tail, which was missing its tip, a noisy tap. "My tail is tipless, because nuclear power plant was designed by a cat," wailed the rat. The bird concurred. "I'm minus a few tail feathers of my own, and whose fault do you think is that? Anything that goes wrong for a bird or a rat, or raises questions or eyebrows, I blame on a cat," declared the rat. "I barely escaped my encounter with the female feline who caused the electricity-producing fission at nuclear power plant." The bird shrieked. "It's her fault my tail is tipless," the rat squeaked. With that, the rat with the tipless tail and the bluebird with a bald spot where her tail feathers should be decided there was one thing they both agreed upon: how a nuclear power plant really works. Indeed, this particular fissioning chain reaction had powered the home of a tabby kitten. On a day so hot that fish jumped out of the ocean already fried, most any cat with claws was down at the beach. Any cat except a red-furred one named Penelope, who did not wish to blister her whiskers. Instead of going fishing on the beach, she went inside her house and turned on a fan and an air conditioner. The pretty bluebird had flown over the kitty-crammed beach, keeping her feathers far out of reach. She noticed the absence of Penelope Cat, and she couldn't help wondering where she was at. "I figured the only reason Penelope would not want to feast on fish was she had in mind a more scrumptious bluebird dish. It ruffled my feathers and roused my suspicions, so I flew by Penelope's house and peered into her kitchen." The bird exclaimed as the rat listened. Penelope was searching the contents of her refrigerator when she glanced out the window and glimpsed her investigator. Meowing wide, she waved her tail and motioned the bird inside. I didn't have time to hide. She turned on the stove the moment she eyed me, the bird cried, resulting in a volt that caused a jolt inside the reactor at nuclear power plant, alleged the rat. A cat cannot cook without electricity, and Penelope gets hers from nuclear energy. I know the difference between a hot pot and a hot tub, and I do not bathe in either one, chit-chatted the bird. The minute she invited me in, I flew off so fast, my tail struck the side of Penelope's house, and some of my pretty blue tail feathers got plucked out. Once I was safe above the ground, I took a look around at the town below. You may know where fissioning comes from, Rat, but I know where electricity goes. The bluebird whispered, it travels by transmission lines, quiet as a mouse, and into a meter box on the side of Penelope's house. How a nuclear power plant works is just as I suspected, the rat interjected. The fissioning going on inside the reactor under the dome is used to produce electricity so Penelope Cat can laze around her home. That cat is basking under the air conditioner, cooking a gourmet dinner. Meanwhile, some poor, starving rat has been tricked into demonstrating a fissioning chain reaction and is dodging simulations of the uranium atoms that fuel the nuclear reactor. The rat paused to pant and continued to rant. Atoms are so tiny and small, you can't see them at all, but only a cat would simulate uranium atoms using mousetraps loaded with orange ping pong balls. Those neutrons looked just like cheddar, and I didn't think a little taste would matter, but it set off a mousetrap chain reaction, and when a neutron hits an atom, the atom splits in two. This split, known as fission, is what gave my tail its boo-boo. One atom fissions two fission four, and then there are more and more. The rat moaned. A whole lot of tail trimming fissioning is what goes on inside the reactor under the dome. The bird ruffled her remaining tail feathers and twittered a groan. All that fission causes a lot of heat, and it gets heated and it gets hot. And the reactor vessel acts like a burner heating a great big pot. The pot in the water gets hotter and hotter, said the rat, until it screams with steam, the bluebird hollered. The steam blows through a pipe like a hurricane's wind and causes the turbine building's giant propellers to spin. Any leftover steam gets a blast of cold water from a cooling pond or cooling tower, and then it's recycled over and over, the rat said. The bird, who had fluttered to the tip-top of nuclear power plants' cooling towers, crowed. Rat, I'm impressed. Recycled is not a term I would expect you to know. I'm a lab rat, not a bird brain, the rodent muttered, then sputtered. The propeller's rotation whirls the generator into operation, so the generator can make electrical energy, the bluebird sang. The rat gave his tipless tail a bang. Then it zapped on transmission wires and spewed to Penelope Cat, who uses electricity to bake a sweet bluebird pie or roast a tasty rat. And that, they believe, is how a nuclear power plant really works. As for Penelope Cat, unknown to our experts, she's a vegetarian. She likes to eat green beans, not bird or rat. And that's how a nuclear power plant really works. Now, when I go to schools and present this, and again, it's a little different than what this take on it is, so kids are a little more inspired to want to learn about it. And one of the questions I always get from teachers is, how on earth did you, or students, how did you come up with your idea for Chubby Lab Rat? And today I'll explain that to you, and I'm going to show you a video. When I would go to do my program back in the days I worked at STP in the nuclear industry, we would try to make it more interesting, and we did just like in the book, a mousetrap and ping ball demonstration. Well, I would get there early. How many of you have ever put these things together? Yeah, well, can you imagine doing like 50 of them and then loading them with ping pong balls? And we had a big giant plexiglass box. So I would get there early before all the kids arrived and try to find a safe place to stash it, and I would load these mouse traps. But there was always that one child in the class, you know, that I called Chubby, the lab rat, that could not resist. They would get there early and they would come in and they would look at your box and they'd either breathe on it or shake it or something, and all those mouse traps would go off and my chain reaction would be done and I'd have to start all over. Well, to prevent that from happening today, my daughter and I, we put together a video to help explain it, where I wouldn't have to cart those mouse traps and do my chain reaction. But when kids ask, where did you get your inspiration? I always tell them, write about what you know, and when you write about what you know, write about what annoys you the most. And back in the day, that was one of the things that annoyed me the most. But let me get out of here, and I'm going to play the video for you. In the video, Chubby, and I call him Chubby in the book, there's a backstory to our lab rat. Initially, Chubby Lab Rat was, he had like escaped from the school and was, at the nuclear power plant visitor center, where he would run around and investigate and get in trouble with our mousetrap demonstration. But in this video, we kind of do a little spoof on what happens in real life. And Chubby's an older, more experienced rat. And he is being interviewed by Berterson Cooper, and he's explaining the fissioning chain reaction that goes on inside the nuclear reactor plant. So, let's see if I can get this to work. Can you guys hear it?
Breaking news. There's fissioning. I repeat, fissioning going on inside the nuclear power plant's nuclear reactor. I'm Berterson Cooper, and I've got the meltdown. At the scene is fissioning chain reaction expert Professor Chubby Rat, whose daring, adventurous discovery of fissioning inside a nuclear chain reaction demonstration was chronicled in his best-selling book, Nuclear Power: How a Nuclear Power Plant Really Works. He's standing live outside the big round dome nuclear people call the reactor containment building. Professor Chubby, what can you tell us about this fissioning situation?
First, I can tell you that inside the nuclear reactor sitting beneath this big dome, a whole lot of fissioning is going on.
Where is this fissioning coming from?
It's coming from inside the reactor. Berterson, as you know from my page-turning best-selling autobiography, I was the first lab rat to expose the mystery, the mayhem, and the cool acronyms, and demonstrate what makes a nuclear power plant nuclear.
Animals, if you're just tuning in, this is Breaking News with Berterson Cooper. I'm talking to nuclear fission expert Professor Chubby Rat, who's live outside nuclear power plant. Professor, can you explain what is happening right now inside this reactor?
Yes, I can, Berterson. It's called a fission chain reaction. It's what occurs when the uranium atoms that fuel the reactor split to create the heat source that lights my light bulbs. Allow me to radiate some brilliance.
You're now looking at Professor Chubby Rat's recreation of his historical tail-trimming demonstration of a fissioning chain reaction.
That's right, Berterson. My associate, Mr. Mouse, will now demonstrate. Inside our mock reactor are mouse traps symbolizing uranium atoms. They've been loaded with orange ping pong balls representing neutrons.
Excuse me for interrupting, Professor, but if I didn't know better, I'd think those neutrons were cheese balls.
Yes, you would, Berterson, and so did I. Naturally, I wanted to investigate. While examining the atoms, I inadvertently released a neutron. When a neutron hits an atom, it releases other neutrons, causing a chain reaction. This nuclear chain reaction is called fissioning. As you are aware, in the process of my remarkable discovery, I lost the tip of my tail. Do not, I repeat, do not try this at home. I and my colleague, Mr. Mouse, are highly trained cartoon illustration experts, not real-life people.
Once again, Professor Chubby Rat will demonstrate a fissioning chain reaction.
There goes Mr. Mouse. He's going in. He's sniffing out the neutron and... Split, fizz, fizz. Nuclear's gotta be the most interesting power plant there is.
There you have it, Professor Chubby Rat, a brave hero who sacrificed the tip of his own tail to expose what goes on inside a nuclear reactor by demonstrating a fissioning chain reaction. Anything else you'd like to share, Professor?
Tonight I'll be at Harvard University bookstore, autographing copies of my controversial best-selling book, participating in a panel discussion with my esteemed colleague, former Governor Jesse the Body Ventura. We'll be divulging the nuclear power plant conspiracy.
This has been Berterson Cooper with an exclusive breaking news report on the fissioning chain reaction taking place right now inside a nuclear reactor due to splitting uranium atoms. You heard it here first, and now you know how nuclear power plant people light their light bulbs. Back to you in the studio. Ferguson Cooper reporting live.
Hey, Ferguson, what hair care products you use?
I hope you guys enjoyed that. I have to ask my daughter, she's the psych major, but when I play this to adult groups and they watch the little mouse getting surrounded by all these atoms, they're kind of small, but they're kind of uncomfortable. But when I play it to my children's groups, they just laugh hysterically. So I don't know if adults, we don't want to laugh at people getting hurt, but the kids have no problem with it. So I find that kind of interesting, and there's probably some psychology behind that. One of my favorite comments about my book came during an interview with a reporter, and she told me, and happened to mention it very nonchalantly, that her third grade daughter said reading my book had made her feel smart. And of course I was trying to be all cool, I was doing an interview, but I have to say inside I was doing my happy dance. You never know what might inspire a child. And when I wrote the book about nuclear power, it was not my intent to humiliate or manipulate the uninformed. I believe that nuclear literacy should challenge the smart child and make a challenged child feel smart. Or to put it another way, I think we should light up a mind that will radiate some brilliance. So I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation, and if you have any pull at all, go to wherever, whoever, and advocate for nuclear literacy in our schools. Thank you. Questions?
We'll take some questions now. Let me start off with one. When you go to a school, how much preparation is done for the students so they understand what an atom is and the components of it, and so that fissioning?
It depends on the school. A lot of times, I'll be honest, even in, like I said, in Texas when I went there, and I was astounded because it's a small town. It's not like here where there's so much competition and the nuclear plant's not the only game in town. That town centers around the nuclear plant. And so the parents there, they kind of thought their kids knew all about it, and really they didn't. They had very little education about it. Many of the teachers, before I went, they purchased or asked for the book, and they talked about it prior to my visit. But honestly, most kids today, I think 5th grade has maybe a segment on energy related, but we are getting absolutely nothing in school. And I was very surprised because in the 80s, that was my job as the power company. They spent a lot of money sending me out to schools. And I got requests not just from schools, but from adult groups to go do the presentation. And today, that just doesn't happen. So, yeah.
How do you handle safety?
How do I handle safety? With the power plant?
And the kids, they probably have heard about it.
I was surprised. I have not heard that from kids very often. I think kids are inundated so much with so many things, with the video games and everything, that Fukushima in some ways isn't as big a deal to them as it is to us. Honestly, because they see that so much on TV and television and the internet, they can Google it. If it's asked at all, I explain that the nuclear reactor is inside the containment building. The containment building is designed to withstand anything and everything. And I also point out that Fukushima was a horrible accident, but it was not necessarily a nuclear accident. They got hit up by 2 catastrophes, which is how that accident with the nuclear plant occurred. So we've had a stellar safety record here in the United States. That is really one of the problems I had prior to the Fukushima accident. When I visited with, I guess, people in the nuclear industry, trying to get them interested in my children's book, I thought, well, back in my day, we would have loved a book like this. We'd have put it on our visitor center shelves, and they didn't have this book, so I thought for sure they'd want it. Well, I started courting them way before Fukushima occurred, and they really weren't that interested. We'd had a stellar safety record. The budget cuts, they closed the visitor centers. They didn't really see the need for a book like this. It was really only after the Fukushima accident that people became more interested in what I'm doing. So, and if I really need to, when I go out to schools, I get an expert, like right back there in the back of this room, to come with me and talk about that. And I do, especially if I'm in a town where if I think there's going to be any anti-all, I'll go in to do the soft approach. But if I know there's going to be somebody that's very blatantly anti, I'll bring in somebody that is an expert to go with me and talk about it. And they're usually very happy to accommodate. So, any other questions?
More of a comment. My wife is an elementary school librarian, and for years she's been trying to get books on fossil fuel. And all you can get is on solar or any other kind of renewable energy. And I'm not surprised that you can't find much on nuclear because you can't find it on fossil fuel.
No, that's true. I wonder, when I was doing my research, I Googled, and I mean, like I said, it's been a work in progress for many years. And I think the Magic School Bus, that was the only thing I could find that had anything, and I don't know that they had anything about nuclear. And I'm completely honest when I said it's a hard topic to convey, especially if you're trying to make it interesting. And I'll be honest, one of the reasons I did a book like this is because back in the day, I was not that kid that was excelled in science and technology. I have children, a son in particular, that comes easy to him, but it didn't me. I was one of these kids that my mind was taking a vacation. And so when I went to the school, I wanted to try to inspire and get kids like the kid I was interested in nuclear power. So, and let's face it, it's easy to fall asleep, even with something like this. You know, when you're in school, it's hard to get it, today especially, because they're so used to the video games. When I worked in South Texas, it was probably before the internet, way before the internet, but we had something that was state of the art, and it was a computer game that went along with our school program. Well, that computer game mesmerized my classrooms. But you know what that computer game is equivalent to today? When these kids take a test, you know, they have to click in the answer. That was what our computer game was. So, you know, we've come a long way in so many aspects, and I was just really taken aback and astounded that we had regressed when it come to education and offering. You know, it seems like a no-brainer. We live next door to the Sharon Harris plant, so you would think all the kids in my neighborhood would know what it does. And really, most of them don't. So some of them didn't need, as one of my very dear friends said, if she'd have known that power plant was there, she wouldn't have moved where she's at. So that was kind of the attitude.
You show the pellet. Okay. I know Dr. Hulish has done this for us before as well. Do you ever get any questions, or I mean, about spent fuel, the problem of spent fuel? What do you do with it, or how do you explain it to kids?
I haven't really gotten that question. We don't ever get that. We hadn't gotten that far into it. Back in the day I worked, the kids really didn't ask that question, but I did a lot of adult groups. And this is what I've found then and now doing this presentation. I worked at the visitor center, and we would go out into the community and do presentations, and people would come in. And what I found was that the parents would come in and they would bring their kids, and they would come in as a pretense to show their children what was going on. Well, the kids, after 5 minutes, they were running around playing with the exhibits, but the parents would be there asking us question after question. And I found that when I was doing my research marketing at the power plant here at Sharon Harris, the exact same thing. It was the adults who were wanting to educate themselves, and they asked that question. So, and I have friends in the industry, and they're very vocal, and they're doing a lot of things regarding answering those questions. And I just read something from one of my colleagues the other day, and it was 5 things you could do with the spent fuel. And in their minds, it's really not a problem. We can put it to use and make good use of it. So, but
Any other questions for
the expert has a question.
We had to have met. I spent 22 years, and I brought my class every single semester to the power plant, from the construction all the way through. So,
In South Texas?
South Texas. I just don't.
Hey, you had to know me. I was Amelia Solomon back in that day, and I did all the tours. You didn't ride a motorcycle back then, did you? Because I did. I was, you know, in the 80s, from 80s to probably 88.
71 to 92.
Yeah. Well, I had to have been one of your tour guides. I had to have been. And if,
I had 1,000 mousetraps.
yeah, you did. Yeah.
Every semester I had
Oh, God.
demonstration.
Yeah.
Kids from the schools had to come to the university.
Do you remember when it was the geodesic domes out there? Okay, that was my office, and that was my office, and everything I've talked about. We had to have. Yeah.
Well, Amelia, you want to tell us a bit about the price? You'll sign books, obviously.
I will. If you want a book, I'll sign it. They're $10. I usually round it off. Don't do the tax or anything, but the books are each $10. And I brought both books. Every time I do a presentation, there's usually someone. I never have an audience that someone has not been touched by cancer, so I always bring that book as well. But they're $10 if you would like a book. I don't know that I mentioned it today, but I have to tell you, I got that question from, I did a presentation. It was actually on the other book. It wasn't about, and it was just when this book was coming out. And I had this doctor raise his hand and ask me, and he was Yale educated, and he wanted to know, didn't I think the reason I had breast cancer is because of working at the nuclear plant? And no, it is not, because there was not even any fuel on site. It was under construction. But, he was not a dumb man, but that's kind of, unless you're in that, we live in a fishbowl. Unless it's something you do and you research, you don't know. But I have gotten involved a little bit with the Go Nuclear Foundation, and one of the concerns is that everything that's going on today with our politics and the nuclear industry, it's not just shutting down nuclear power plants, it's shutting down nuclear medicine. And as a cancer survivor, I was in the generation, it was a long time ago, and I had to go in and be, have a surgeon cut on me, in other words, and to find what he needed to find. My mother, which was 10 years later, she was diagnosed. She went in for, diagnostic testing, and they used radiation to help find and cure her. So I am pro-nuclear, and definitely pro-nuclear medicine. So, there's the bad and there's the good with everything. Depends on how you use it. So.
Amelia, thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Let's get out of here.
Thanks so much.